I try to sound severe. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his foot right down and give him more exercise, he's going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet. I'm sure you're right, but it is so difficult, so very difficult. She set off, head down, along the road, as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats, for the cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. He struggled on, drooping in his harness. Here, the narrator tried to talk very seriously to Mrs. Pumphrey that if she did not control Tricky's eating habits and increase his exercise, he would soon fall ill. And he told her that she should stay strong and strict with him and put him on a diet. Mrs. Pumphrey accepted that although she knew that Mr. Harriet was right, but it was too difficult for her to refuse him for anything. But then she felt the place, she left the place as if she was now ready to follow the new routine properly. Mr. Harriet was watching them go and looking at Tricky walking unsteadily. The narrator was also looking at the tweed coat that Tricky was wearing. Okay, tweed means a rough surface woolen cloth. So he was wearing a special kind of a coat. Tricky was wearing a coat, and he had a wardrobe full of these coats and also raincoats for the rainy days. And this line also suggests one more meaning that Mrs. Pumphrey was a very rich lady as she had a lot of money to spend on a dog. So that is the inner sense of this line about this court. We can see that Mrs. Pumphrey is such a rich lady. That is why she is spending a lot of money on her dog. I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. The expected call came within a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes, and besides, he has bouts of vomiting. He spent all his time lying on a rug, panting. Didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to do anything. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Tricky out of the house for a period. I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight to be kept under observation. The poor lady almost swooned. She was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill, and this was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay and followed by Mrs. Pumphrey's wailings. I marched out to the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. So right now we know the author, the narrator was expecting a call from Mrs. Pumphrey, and it is all about the illness of the dog. Mrs. Pumphrey was very upset as Tricky was not eating anything, not even his favorite dishes, and was vomiting frequently. So this is the illness of that dog. He didn't even want to do anything. He's not going for walking, he is just sleeping always. And being a veterinary doctor, the narrator knew that the only way to get Tricky well was to get him out of the house for a few days. And he then suggested to Mrs. Pumphrey that it would be good to get Tricky hospitalized and keep him under observation for about 15 days. And upon hearing this, Mrs. Pumphrey nearly fainted. She can't live without him. And she was sure that if Tricky did not see her every day, he would also surely die. But the narrator kept his word. He was very damn sure about his words. He told her that this was the only option as Tricky was very ill. And the narrator thought that it would be best to avoid any delays and get him off get him to the hospital as soon as possible. It is the best option to make him hospitalized as soon as possible. And he went to their house, and even though Mrs. Pamphry was crying because she did not want her dog to go away from her, he took the dog. The narrator took the dog, he wrapped it in a blanket and put him in the car. The entire staff was roused and maids rushed in and out, bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. Realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. As I moved off, Mrs. Pamphry, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little cards through the window. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. Out on the road, I glanced down at my pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by my side. I patted the head, and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. Poor old lad, I said. You haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. The maids were then woken up and asked to get out of Tricky's stuff. And his stuff included the things like his day bed, night bed, favorite cushions, toys, rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, and his snack bowl, or in his supper bowl. And Mr. Harriet, the author, knew that so much stuff won't fit in his car, so he started rushing things. And as the doctor was living with Tricky, Mrs. Pamphry threw a lot of coats that Tricky used to wear in the car. And as the narrator was turning the car on the turn, he saw through the rear mirror that everyone was crying. And he patted the little helpless animal, that is Tricky, who responded by just wagging his tail. And the narrator then thought and told Tricky that he knew that Tricky did not have any energy, but he surely had a way to get him better. At the surgery, the household dogs surged around me. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes, and when put down, lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing round him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. I made up a bed for him in a warm, loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days, I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound, and his friend. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowls. There was a usual headlong rush, followed by the sounds of high-speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. As soon as they reached the hospital, they means the dog and the narrator, all other dogs gathered around the doctor. Okay. Then Tricky looked at all of them, and when the doctor put him down on the carpet, he couldn't even move. The other dogs then sniffed at him and thought to themselves that he was a very uninteresting object, and that there was no use standing there, and they just left the place. Then the narrator made the bed for Tricky in a warm box along with other dogs. And for 2 days, the narrator kept him just on water and nothing else. Only the thing he was given was just water, no food. And on the second day, he roamed around looking at the place around him. And on the third day, he was also making some noises to let the people in the hospital know that he too wanted to go out with the other dogs. And when the narrator opened the door, Tricky quickly came out and was surrounded by Joe, who was a greyhound, and his friends. And after that, sniffing him for a moment, all of them, means the dogs, left for the garden where Tricky followed them. Then later in the evening, the narrator was present at the dinner time and was watching all of them, especially Tristan, as he was slopping the food. And all of them, all the dogs were eating with great speed because they knew that if they didn't finish quickly, then the other dog, after finishing his meal, would come to eat their meal.